He thought money could buy anything, until she refused to sell her heart. Lily Carter almost didn't pick up the call because unknown numbers usually meant trouble, bills, or promises she couldn't afford to believe. But that morning the rent notice sat folded on her kitchen counter like a quiet threat, and her phone kept ringing. So she answered, her voice soft, cautious, "Hello." And the voice on the other end was calm, precise, expensive in a way she couldn't explain, asking if she was available for a paid role, something simple, something discreet, something that would solve her problems for at least a few months. And she should have hung up. She should have known nothing in life came that easy. But desperation has a way of sounding like opportunity. So 2 hours later she stood outside a glass building that touched the sky, her worn sneakers out of place against polished marble floors, her reflection small and unsure in doors that opened without her touching them. And everything inside felt too quiet, too perfect, like she had stepped into someone else's life by mistake, until she saw him, Ethan Cole, standing near the far window, sunlight catching on the sharp lines of his suit, his posture still, controlled, like nothing in the world could shake him. And yet there was something in his eyes when he looked at her, something tired, something distant, something that didn't belong to a man who had everything. And for a moment she forgot why she was there, forgot the script she had practiced in her head, forgot the money, because the silence between them felt heavier than anything she had carried in. And then he spoke, simple and direct. "I need a fiancé." Like it was a business deal, like love was a line item on a contract. And she blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. But he continued, explaining it all with calm precision. The public appearances, the timeline, the payment wired weekly, enough to clear her debts, enough to give her space to breathe, enough to make this feel dangerously real. And when she hesitated, he stepped closer, just enough for her to notice the faint tension in his hand, like even this was harder than he let on. And he held out a small velvet box, opening it with a quiet click that echoed louder than it should have, revealing a ring that caught the light in a way that made her chest tighten. Because it wasn't just beautiful, it was symbolic, it was something people didn't pretend with. And yet here he was, offering it like a prop, like a tool, like something that meant nothing at all. And his voice softened just slightly when he said, "There's only one rule." And she looked up at him, waiting, her heart beating faster, for reasons she didn't understand. And he met her eyes, steady, unreadable. "Don't fall in love." And something about the way he said it made it feel less like a rule and more like a warning, like he had learned that lesson the hard way, like love had already cost him more than he was willing to lose again. And Lily let out a small breath she didn't realize she was holding, glancing at the ring, at the life it represented, at the risk hidden beneath its shine, and then back at him. And for a moment the world outside that room disappeared, leaving just the two of them and a decision that would change everything. And she gave a small, almost amused smile, soft but steady. "I've never had anything that expensive before," she said, her voice light, but her eyes honest, "especially not love." And Ethan watched her in silence, something flickering behind his calm expression, something he couldn't quite name, because for the first time, this didn't feel like control, it felt like the beginning of something he wasn't prepared for. The ring felt heavier the moment it touched her skin, as if it carried a promise she never agreed to make. And Lily kept her hand still while Ethan gently adjusted it, his fingers cool, precise, never lingering longer than necessary. Like even this closeness had rules he refused to break. And when he stepped back, the distance returned instantly, clean and controlled, as if the moment had never happened at all. "You will move in tonight," he said, already turning toward the window, his voice steady, businesslike. "There will be a schedule, a wardrobe prepared, and a briefing on the people you will meet." And Lily nodded slowly, trying to keep up with a life that was already moving faster than she could think. And by sunset she found herself standing inside a house that did not feel real, the ceilings too high, the silence too perfect, every surface polished to a shine that reflected a version of her she barely recognized. And someone handed her clothes softer than anything she had ever worn, fabrics that felt like they belonged to a different world. And she changed quietly, studying herself in the mirror, wondering how long she could pretend to belong here before someone noticed the truth. And when she stepped out, Ethan was waiting in the living room, reviewing something on his tablet, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. and for a second she hesitated, unsure how to stand, how to speak, how to exist in this space without breaking something invisible. "You are late," he said without looking up, not harsh, just factual, and she glanced at the clock, realizing she was exactly 2 minutes behind the schedule she had not even memorized yet. "I am sorry," she replied softly, and he finally looked at her, his gaze moving over her in a quick, assessing way, not judgmental, but distant, like he was checking if the illusion worked, and something in his eyes paused for just a fraction longer than expected. "You will need to adjust faster," he added, quieter now, and she nodded again. But this time there was a small flicker of determination in her chest, because she had spent her whole life adjusting, just never in a place like this. And over the next hour he walked her through the details, the names she needed to remember, the story they would tell, how they met, how long they had been together, even the small things like how she should stand beside him in photos, close enough to look real, but not close enough to invite questions. And Lily listened carefully, repeating details in her mind, but every now and then her attention drifted, not to the words, but to the pauses between them, to the way Ethan never fully relaxed, to the tension he carried even in silence, like he was always waiting for something to go wrong. And when he finished, he set the tablet down and looked at her again. "We have a dinner tomorrow night," he said. "My family will be there." And the word family seemed to weigh more than the rest, and she felt a small knot form in her stomach, but she simply nodded, because this was part of the deal. And as he turned to leave, she spoke without thinking. "Do you ever get used to this?" And he stopped, just for a second, his back still facing her, the silence stretching between them. And when he answered, his voice was lower, almost distant. "No," he said. "You just learn how to hide it better." And then he walked away, leaving Lily alone in a room that was too big, too quiet, her reflection staring back at her with a ring that did not belong to her life. And for the first time since she said yes, she realized this was not just a role she had to play. It was a world she might lose herself in if she was not careful. The dining room felt colder than the rest of the house, even though the temperature was perfect. And Lily realized it was not the air, but the people sitting across from her that made it feel that way. Their eyes sharp, quiet, measuring every detail of her dress, her posture, the way she held the glass of water in her hand. And she kept her back straight just like Ethan had shown her, her fingers steady even though her heart would not slow down. And beside her Ethan sat composed, calm, his presence filling the room in a way that made everything else feel smaller. But he did not look at her, not once since they arrived, as if distance was still part of the performance, or maybe part of his protection. And the woman at the head of the table, elegant and perfectly controlled, set her fork down with a soft sound that somehow carried across the entire room. "So this is the fiancé," she said, her voice smooth but distant. And Lily offered a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am," she answered, gently, but the woman's gaze did not soften, it only sharpened. "You appeared quite suddenly," she continued. "Ethan has always been selective," and the pause between her words felt intentional, like a quiet test, and Lily could feel the weight of it pressing against her, searching for a mistake, for something that did not belong. And before she could respond, another voice joined, lighter but edged with curiosity. "Where did you say you met him?" A younger woman asked, leaning forward slightly, her eyes bright with interest that did not feel entirely kind. And Lily remembered the story, every detail Ethan had given her, the place, the timing, the small coincidence that made it believable, and she opened her mouth to answer. But something stopped her for just a second, not fear, not doubt, just the sudden awareness that every word she spoke would shape how real this became. And she chose her tone carefully, soft but certain. "We met at a bookstore," she said. And for a moment the room went quiet, not because the answer was wrong, but because it was unexpected, simple in a way that did not match the world they were sitting in. And she continued, her voice steady. "He was looking for something he could not find," and she allowed a small smile to form, not rehearsed, just real enough to feel it. "I helped him." And the younger woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. But before she could push further, Ethan's voice cut in, calm but firm. "That is enough." And it was not loud, but it shifted the room instantly, the air tightening just slightly as all attention turned to him. And for the first time that evening, he looked at Lily, really looked at her, his gaze steady, something unreadable beneath the surface. And without warning, he reached for her hand, his fingers closing gently around hers, the contact warm, grounding, and completely unexpected, and the ring caught the light between them, drawing every eye back to that single detail. And he spoke again, his voice even, controlled, but carrying something stronger beneath it. "She is with me." And the simplicity of the words made them feel more real than anything rehearsed, more solid than the story they had built, and Lily felt a small shift inside her chest. Something quiet but undeniable, because for the first time since this began, she was not just playing a role, she was being chosen, even if it was only for show, even if it was only for now. And across the table the woman at the head studied them both in silence, her expression unreadable, as if deciding whether to accept what she saw or challenge it further. But she said nothing, and the conversation slowly moved on, though the tension never fully left, lingering in the quiet spaces between words, in the glances that lasted just a second too long. And under the table Ethan's hand remained around hers, steady, unmoving, as if letting go too soon might break something they had not even named yet. And Lily did not pull away, not because she forgot the rules, but because for that one moment, the warmth felt real enough to hold on to. The house was silent again when they returned, but this time the silence felt different, heavier, as if the night had left something behind that neither of them knew how to name. And Lily slipped off her shoes near the entrance, the soft sound echoing faintly against the marble floor, while Ethan walked ahead without a word, his jacket still perfectly in place, his posture unchanged, like the entire dinner had been just another meeting to him. But when he reached the living room, he stopped. Just for a second, his hand resting lightly on the back of a chair as if he needed something to hold on to. And Lily noticed it. That small break in control he probably thought no one could see. And she hesitated before stepping closer. Not too close. Just enough to share the same quiet space. "You did not have to do that," she said softly, her voice careful, not wanting to push too far, and he did not turn immediately, his gaze fixed somewhere distant. "They would not have stopped," he replied. After a moment, his tone calm but tired in a way he could not fully hide, and she looked down at her hand, the ring still catching the light, the memory of his grip still warm against her skin. "Still," she added gently, "you did not have to." And this time he turned, his eyes meeting hers, searching, as if trying to understand why she would say that, why she would not simply accept it as part of the arrangement. And for a brief second the space between them felt smaller than it should have been, like something invisible had shifted, and then he stepped back again, creating distance, restoring the order he needed. "Get some rest," he said, his voice returning to that familiar controlled tone, but it did not land the same anymore, not after what she had seen. And Lily nodded, though she did not move right away, because something about leaving felt unfinished, like a sentence that had been cut off too early. And before she could stop herself, she spoke again, quieter this time. "You do not have to be alone all the time." And the words hung in the air, simple but dangerous, crossing a line neither of them had agreed to cross. And Ethan froze, just slightly, his expression tightening for a fraction of a second before settling back into something unreadable. And when he answered, his voice was low, almost distant. "That is not part of the contract." And it was not harsh, but it was final, a reminder, a boundary, a wall carefully rebuilt in a single sentence. And Lily felt it, that quiet push back, and she nodded again, softer this time, understanding more than he expected her to, because she had spent her whole life reading what people did not say. And she turned to leave, her steps light against the floor as she made her way upstairs, but halfway up she paused, her hand resting on the railing, listening to the silence below. And after a few seconds she reached into her pocket, pulling out a small folded piece of paper she had taken earlier from the desk in her room, and she walked back down slowly, placing it on the table near where he stood without saying a word. And then she left for real. This time, her door closing quietly behind her, leaving Ethan alone with the stillness once more. And after a long moment he looked down at the paper, hesitating before picking it up, unfolding it carefully like it might disappear if he moved too fast, and written in soft, simple handwriting were the words, You do not have to be strong when no one is watching. And he stared at it longer than he expected, the silence around him deepening, because for the first time in a long time, someone had seen something he had worked so hard to hide, and instead of using it against him, she had left it there, quiet, gentle, like an offer he did not know how to accept. The next morning arrived, too quietly, as if the house itself was holding its breath, and Lily woke before the sunlight fully reached her window, the unfamiliar softness of the bed reminding her that none of this was truly hers. And for a moment she lay still, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the ring against her finger, a small but constant reminder of the role she had agreed to play. And yet something about last night lingered, not the dinner, not the tension, but the look in Ethan's eyes when he read her note. A crack so brief, she almost thought she imagined it. And she pushed the thought away as she got ready, dressing in something simple even though her closet was filled with options she had never dreamed of before, because she did not want to lose herself too quickly in a life that was not built for her. And when she stepped downstairs, she found Ethan already there, standing near the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee in his hand, the morning light soft against his profile, and for a second she paused, surprised to see him like this, less guarded, less composed, like the early hour had stripped away some of the distance he usually carried. But the moment shifted the second he noticed her, his posture straightening slightly, the familiar control settling back in place. "You are up early," he said, his voice calm, neutral, and she gave a small nod. "I am used to it," she replied, her tone just as quiet. And there was a brief pause, the kind that could have been empty, but was not, because both of them were aware of something unspoken sitting between them. And then he set his cup down, his gaze flickering toward the table where the folded note still rested, untouched since last night. And Lily followed his eyes, her heart tightening just slightly, unsure if she had crossed a line she could not step back from. But before she could say anything, he spoke. "We have a meeting this afternoon," and his voice had that familiar distance again, but there was something softer underneath, something he had not quite hidden well enough. "Business partners," he added. "They will expect you to be convincing." And she nodded, stepping further into the room, the floor cool beneath her feet. "I will be," she said simply, and he studied her for a moment, longer than usual, as if trying to understand where her confidence came from, or why she did not seem intimidated by the pressure he was placing on her. And then, almost without thinking, he asked, "Why did you say that last night?" And the question caught her off guard, not because she did not expect it, but because she did not think he would ask. And she met his gaze, steady but gentle. "Because it is true," she answered, her voice soft but certain. "You do not have to be strong all the time." And the silence that followed felt different this time, not tense, not distant, but fragile, like something that could break if either of them moved too quickly. And Ethan looked away first, his jaw tightening slightly as if the truth was harder to accept than anything else. And he let out a quiet breath, almost unnoticeable. "People leave when you stop being strong," he said, his voice low, more to himself than to her. And Lily felt that sentence settle deep, heavier than anything he had said before, because it was not part of the script, it was not controlled, it was real. And she stepped a little closer, not crossing the space completely, just enough to be heard without raising her voice. "Not everyone," she said gently, and he looked at her again, something uncertain flickering in his eyes, something that did not belong to a man who controlled everything. And for a brief moment neither of them spoke, the quiet stretching between them, filled with something neither of them fully understood yet. And then the moment passed, as it always did, and Ethan straightened slightly, the walls going back up piece by piece. "Be ready by 2, he said, his tone returning to business. But this time it did not erase what had just happened, it only covered it, thinly, like a layer that could crack again at any moment. And as he turned to leave, Lily remained where she was, her hand brushing lightly against the note on the table, feeling the softness of the paper beneath her fingers. And for the first time since this began, she realized this was no longer just a role she was playing. It was a connection she was slowly stepping into, one quiet moment at a time, whether he was ready for it or not. By the time the car pulled up in front of the glass building downtown, Lily had already repeated every detail of their story at least 10 times in her head, but none of it felt as real as the quiet presence beside her, and Ethan had not said much during the drive. Only a few brief reminders about names and expectations, his voice calm but distant, like he was preparing for something more than just a meeting. And when the driver opened the door, he stepped out first, then turned slightly, offering his hand without looking directly at her. A small gesture that felt both practiced and unexpectedly gentle. And she placed her hand in his, the contact brief but steady, and together they walked into a world that clearly belonged to him. The lobby wide and bright. People moving quickly but pausing just enough to acknowledge him. Their respect quiet but immediate, and Lily stayed close, matching his pace. Her heartbeat steadying with each step as she reminded herself this was part of the role, just another performance. And yet when they entered the conference room, something shifted, the air heavier, the eyes sharper, the attention more focused, because here it was not about family or appearances, it was about power, and the people waiting inside carried themselves with the same confidence Ethan did, controlled, measured, and watching everything. And as introductions were made, she felt the familiar weight of being observed, but this time she did not shrink from it. She held her posture, her voice soft but clear when she spoke, answering simple questions with calm honesty, not overplaying the part, not forcing anything that did not feel natural. And for a while it worked, the conversation flowing smoothly, business terms she did not fully understand moving around her like a language she was slowly learning to hear, until one of the men across the table leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful but probing. "You seem different from what we expected," he said, his tone polite but edged with curiosity. And Lily met his gaze without hesitation. "Different how?" she asked, her voice steady, and he smiled faintly. "Less rehearsed," he replied, and for a second the room went quiet, the kind of silence that waited for something to break, and Lily felt the pressure of it, the invisible line she could either follow or step away from, and she chose carefully, her fingers brushing lightly against the ring, grounding herself. "Maybe that is because I am not pretending as much as you think," she said, her tone gentle but certain, and the words lingered in the air, simple but unexpected, and she felt Ethan's attention shift beside her, sharper now, focused entirely on her, and before anyone else could respond, he spoke, his voice calm but carrying a quiet authority that settled the room instantly. "That will be all for now," he said, closing the discussion with a finality no one questioned, and the meeting ended shortly after, the tension dissolving into polite goodbyes. But the moment stayed with them as they walked back out into the hallway, the silence between them different this time, not distant, but charged with something unspoken. And when they reached the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a soft sound, Ethan finally turned to her, his eyes searching her face in a way he had not done before. "That was not in the script," he said quietly, and Lily looked back at him, her expression calm, her voice just as soft. "Neither was what you said earlier," she replied, and the elevator hummed softly around them, the space suddenly too small for the distance he usually kept, and for a moment he did not respond, his gaze lingering, something uncertain flickering beneath the control he held so tightly. And then he looked away, exhaling slowly as if steadying himself. But the shift had already happened, subtle but real, because this was no longer just about convincing others. It was about the truth slipping through in places neither of them could fully control. And as the doors opened, he stepped out first, but this time he did not move ahead. Immediately, he waited, just a fraction longer than necessary, and when she stepped beside him, their shoulders nearly touching, the distance between them felt thinner than ever before, like one step closer would change everything, and neither of them was quite ready for that yet. The drive back felt longer than usual, not because of the distance but because of the silence that settled between them, and Lily sat quietly by the window, watching the city blur past in soft reflections while her thoughts stayed fixed on the way Ethan had looked at her in the elevator, like he was trying to understand something he did not expect to feel. And beside her he remained still, one hand resting against his knee, the other lightly tapping his phone without really using it, a habit of control more than distraction. And when the car finally stopped in front of the house, neither of them moved right away, the engine humming softly as if waiting for a decision neither of them had made yet. And then Ethan spoke, his voice calm but carrying something firmer underneath. "We need to extend the contract," he said. The words simple but heavy, and Lily turned to look at him, her expression quiet, her heart tightening in a way she could not fully explain, because she had known this moment would come, had prepared herself for it, and yet hearing it out loud felt different, more real, more final. "There are more events," he continued, his tone steady, almost rehearsed. "More expectations, more visibility. It makes sense to continue." And she listened, nodding slightly as he spoke, but her attention was not on the details. It was on the distance in his voice, the way he had already turned this back into a transaction, as if the moments they had shared did not exist, or at least did not matter enough to change anything. And when he finished, the silence returned, thicker this time, filled with everything neither of them had said yet. And Lily looked down at her hand, at the ring that had once felt like an opportunity and now felt like a question she could not ignore. And she took a small breath, steadying herself, because she knew what she was about to say would change everything. And when she spoke, her voice was soft, but it did not shake. "I do not think I can do that," she said, and Ethan turned to her immediately, his expression tightening just slightly, surprise breaking through his usual control. "You agreed to the terms," he replied, not harsh, but firm, as if logic alone should be enough to resolve this. And she met his gaze, her eyes clear, honest in a way that made it harder to look away. "I agreed to pretend," she said gently. That was the deal. And he held her gaze, waiting, expecting her to continue, and she did, the words coming slower now, heavier with truth. "But I cannot keep pretending something that is not a lie anymore." And the air in the car shifted, the quiet, turning fragile, almost unbearable. And for a moment Ethan said nothing, his expression unreadable, but his stillness sharper, like everything inside him had paused at once. And Lily felt her heart beat louder in her chest, but she did not look away, because this was the one thing she could not take back. And she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not want your money anymore," she said, her fingers tightening slightly against her palm. "I wanted you." And the words settled between them, simple, unpolished, completely unprotected. And for the first time since she met him, Ethan did not have a response ready, his control slipping just enough to reveal the uncertainty beneath it. The fear he had spent so long avoiding now standing right in front of him. And the silence stretched, long and heavy, filled with everything he could say but did not, and everything she had already given without asking for anything back. And after what felt like forever, he looked away, his jaw tightening as if the truth was something he could not hold on to. Not yet. Not like this. And he reached for the door, opening it without another word, stepping out into the quiet afternoon, leaving Lily sitting there for just a second longer, her chest tight but steady, because she had finally said what she could not hide anymore. And even if it changed everything, she knew she could not go back to pretending after this. The house felt unfamiliar when Lily stepped inside. Even though nothing had changed, every piece of furniture still perfectly placed, every surface still quiet and untouched, but something inside her had shifted, and it made everything else feel distant, like she was already halfway gone. And she stood there for a moment, her fingers resting lightly against the ring, the weight of it heavier now than it had ever been before, not because of what it represented to others, but because of what it meant to her. And upstairs the silence stretched long and empty. No footsteps, no voice, no sign that Ethan had come in behind her, and she did not turn to check, because she already knew he had chosen distance, the only way he knew how to protect himself. And slowly she walked to her room, each step steady, deliberate, like she was giving herself time to change her mind, but she did not. And once inside she closed the door softly, leaning back against it as she let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding, her chest tight but clear, because even though it hurt, it was honest, and honesty had always cost her something. And she moved quietly, packing only what she had brought with her, folding each piece carefully, not touching anything that belonged to this life, as if leaving it untouched would make it easier to walk away. And when she finished, she sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, looking down at the ring one last time, the light catching it softly, almost gently, and with a small, steady motion, she slipped it off, the absence immediate, her hand suddenly lighter but colder, and she placed it on the table beside the folded note. the same one he had read, the same one that had started something neither of them could control, and for a second her fingers lingered near it, not touching, just close enough to remember. And then she stood, picking up her bag, and walked out without looking back, the sound of the door closing behind her barely louder than a whisper, and outside the air felt different, cooler, real in a way the house had not been. And she kept walking, step after step, not knowing exactly where she would go, only knowing she could not stay. Not like this, not as something unfinished and miles away. Ethan stood alone in the same living room, the silence pressing in from every direction, heavier than it had ever been before, and for a long time he did not move, his gaze fixed somewhere distant as if he could still see her standing there, hear her voice, feel the weight of her words settling deeper with every passing second. And when he finally looked down, his eyes landed on the table, on the ring, on the note, and something inside him shifted in a way he could not ignore, because this time she had not just walked away from the deal, she had walked away from him, and there was no contract left to bring her back, no condition to rely on, no control to hold on to. And he stepped closer, slowly, almost hesitantly, his fingers brushing against the edge of the table before picking up the ring, the metal cold against his skin, and for the first time it did not feel like an object. It felt like something he had lost before he even understood how much it mattered, and his hand tightened slightly around it. The silence around him no longer empty, but filled with something heavier, something sharper, because the truth she had given him was still there, still waiting, and this time he could not pretend it was not real. It took him 2 days to realize silence could feel louder than any room he had ever walked into. And by the third morning, Ethan was already standing outside a small bookstore on a quiet street he had never noticed before, the kind of place that did not belong to his world, the kind of place where things were not controlled or calculated. And he hesitated for only a second before stepping inside, the soft chime above the door breaking the stillness. And there she was, behind the counter, arranging a stack of books with the same quiet focus she had carried into his life, as if nothing had changed, as if everything had. And when she looked up, surprise flickered across her face before settling into something calmer, something careful, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the distance between them filled with everything that had been left unfinished. And then Ethan stepped closer, slower than he had ever moved before, his usual certainty replaced by something unfamiliar, something real. And he held the ring in his hand, not offering it yet, just holding it like a truth he could no longer avoid. "I thought control would protect me," he said quietly, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "But all it did was push you away." And Lily listened, her eyes steady, her expression